Hello and welcome to Abnormal Mapping, episode 88. I'm your host, Em. With me is my usual co-host, Jackson.
Hello.
And we have a special guest back on the podcast after being on a couple months ago, is Aisling.
Hello.
Hey.
We're here to talk about video games. Jackson,
Yes,
let's start with you. What have you been playing?
Oh, God. The games for the podcast and the other things for the podcast, because we have too many podcasts for me to play anything else. Have I even touched another video game? Like, not really, honestly.
You have played 1/3 of Birth by Sleep.
Yep. Yeah, no, if we're keeping track of the Kingdom Hearts journey, which I get, right, I guess it's been a long time since we recorded a normal mapping, even though it's been 2 weeks. But, yeah, last time I checked in on that was I played the first third of Birth by Sleep, and I enjoyed it a lot. Love to go back to it sometime, but we are very busy. And, yeah, it's cool. I like the command deck system a lot. I know that's not in 3, and that's very disappointing to me, because it ends up feeling kind of like a real-time version of Final Fantasy XII's Gambit system in a way. Like, not to the full extent, but you set up your deck, you press triangle to do a move, and the deck is like, all right, I want fire, I want hard attack, I want heal, I want this, and every time you press triangle, it goes down directly to the next one, and you can just go to the start anytime. So you just load up the attacks that like work in tandem, press triangle 3 times, and kill everyone, and it's very satisfying and good. It feels like a good way to design around Kingdom Hearts' inherent limitation of being an action game where you can dodge every attack and you can hit every enemy with just the regular attack. So it kind of, as it is regularly designed, incentivizes never using magic unless you're in like dire straits because you want to save your MP for heals.
Hard disagree.
Well, no, I mean, like, that is the problem with action game design. Kingdom Hearts 2, like, designs against that by adding the, like, making it so that you recharge when you run out, right? Like, they have been working on this problem. I think the command deck is a better solution for it.
Okay.
Because every ability has its own cooldown timer, and that's the only way that abilities are monitored. And it encourages you to switch up what you're using all the way. I mean, I guess other people are just better about using their MP bar than me, but I appreciated this.
Yeah, fair enough.
And yeah, it's good. Everyone should play Birth by Sleep, but everyone's already played Kingdom Hearts 3, so like I've missed the boat. So you know, that's my take, I guess. The game's good.
Okay. Aisling, what have you been playing?
Primarily Kingdom Hearts 3, which I know I can't talk a whole lot about for mostly Jackson's sake. I think you've been playing the game as well.
Yeah, I'm like a third in.
I think I can safely say that I kind of expected it, but I was surprised how much, when you don't have nostalgia for the Disney worlds that are in the game, it affects the experience a lot. But otherwise, yeah, I don't want to say too much because, you know, Jackson's going to play the game eventually.
Yeah, I will be there. We'll be able to do a proper Kingdom Hearts talk later in the year with everyone.
Never.
Catch up.
Never.
No, this one will happen.
Okay. I have been playing Spyro the Dragon 1.
Hell yeah!
Because I picked up the Spyro trilogy. It was on sale recently on PSN. I had played Spyro, like actual Spyro, mostly the demo on like the PlayStation Underground discs back in the day. I don't think I ever rented the game, and I certainly didn't own it. And I like Spyro a lot. I remember thinking it was really floaty and weird, and it's still floaty and weird, but it's nice to just play a chill platformer now that those things don't exist. As a thing you can do. Nobody makes those anymore. And so it's nice just run around without a whole lot of peril, collecting gems and jumping on stuff. The flight, there's like levels where Spyro's just flying and you have to collect things. Really those levels are terrible. They're the worst.
The first one especially is like the worst one. I think I failed it about 10 times.
So I've done 2 so far because I'm 2 worlds in. I just started the 3rd. And each time, I have to basically trial and error it about 10 times to get the full run. Because to get the full marks, you have to collect all 10 of 4 things in a single run. And it's all timed. So doing that was, like, I intend to 100% this game. I guess that's just who I am. I guess I should lead with that. I could just skip these things, but I will not. Because I'm stubborn. But it's good. I after this, I'm probably gonna take a big break before I play Spyro 2 because from what I can tell, those games are basically the same game, much the same way Crash Bandicoot is. I'm sure they get better, but also they're probably too similar for me to just jump from one to the other.
Yeah, I mean, I like Spyro 1 a lot more than I like Crash Bandicoot 1.
Well, yes, it's a much better game.
So I'm actually really curious because I would like to go on to Spyro 2 at some point. I never quite finished my Spyro 1 run, but I got pretty close. So I'll finish that.
Ripto's Rage? Is that 2?
One of them. That's definitely one of them.
Okay.
No, Spyro 3 Ripto's Rage, Spyro 2 Year of the Dragon.
I would assume that would go the other way around.
I definitely played all these games at some point, but all I remember is like very vague things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I played a little bit on the PlayStation at my friend's house. I remember really liking flying, and that remains true. Gliding is fun.
I actually don't like the glide.
You don't like the glide?
I don't like the glide. I think the ways in which you have to like make sure you're absolutely at the pinnacle of your jump and the game designs around it is a little too stringent. I just wish he had like a clamber when you got close to like a geometry. If you're just underneath it, he like climbed
absolutely.
up.
It's true, like, anytime the game makes that very necessary, it's frustrating, but the other way it goes, which is the time where you feel like you're cheating the game by gliding onto a platform you shouldn't get to, even though they probably did design it for that.
Oh, they always do.
They always do, but it gets that feeling across, I bet I could get to that if I glide, and you do, and it feels good. I like that kind of level design, and Spyro has a lot of that, but I'm nerves is the wrong word, but I'm like hesitant about, because I've heard that Spyro 2 and 3 get like heavy on the mini games and less about the core. Just here's a world, go through it till you get all the gems.
I mean, I could appreciate some variety because like, I mean, this is nice, but you literally do the same thing in every
do the
level.
one thing, yeah. Sometimes you do a terrible flight level.
I do really like how the remake looks. I think it adds a lot of charm to the worlds. They have a very like almost like clay model look to them often. I dislike that the dragons all have like the same boring like American voice actor voice now. There was much more charm in the like fake European or real European voices used for the dragons in the first game in my memory. And I did look up some video, and yeah, they were better than these ones. Though the dragons do all have like a personality. Like they all have, one of them is painting, one of them is making bread, one of them has like an axe. Like they all have their character trait, class in the village kind of nature to them, which they did not originally have, which I appreciate.
The designs are really cool in this game.
Yeah.
It's a good remake.
They don't try to make Spyro like cool. He is just a very overeager child, and I appreciate that because 90s Spyro is definitely trying to be cool.
The choice of them to just keep the same like lines and not try to rewrite any of the dialogue to make it feel more natural was very good, because they do all this effort and then the dialogue is just, Spyro, remember to jump over the power lines.
It's
and
good.
Spyro goes,
it's
aha!
Extremely good.
Yep. Good game.
All right. With that update out of the way, I guess we can move on to our game club this month.
Our game club for this month is the game Killer7, which is originally a GameCube game from 2005, developed by Grasshopper, published by Capcom, written and directed by Suda51. It is the game that, like, I don't know if it's actually the first one of his to come over here, but it is the first one to come over here that definitely like did cult numbers and kind of put him on the map. In a lot of audiences, and that's we are playing the PC version that came out recently. At least me and Emma, I think Aisling played the old GameCube one rather than buy it again, because they are identical.
I own the GameCube and the PlayStation 2 one because I bought the PlayStation 2 one first, and it turns out that was a terrible port.
Yes, it's not very good. The loading times, oh god. But we were able to play the game. We played it on the computer, so that was made it very easy and accessible. It's available for everyone. If you have never played Killer7, just go get it. And we're going to talk about the whole thing now, and that's the game. Killer7 is a Resident Evil-like game in which you go and use keys to open doors. There are various rooms. The environments like double back on each other. They have a lot of backtracking. You find things, like you find items that are used in puzzles to allow you to progress through the environment. Just as with Resident Evil, there is like obstacles and enemies you have to fight along the way. Unlike the survival horror zombies, these are the Heaven's Smile, which are invisible monsters that you have to dispatch while walking around the environment. And the way you do that is you press the left trigger whenever you hear a laugh to scan the environment to make them visible. And then you go into first-person mode and you shoot them in their weak spot. You play as the Killer7, which is 6 people at any given time.
7 people. 7 people.
No, 7 people at any given time. It's 6 people. It's 6 people in normal gameplay, or it's 8 people around the edges.
Yeah, but you can play as Garcian pretty regularly as long as someone.
I guess you could play as Garcian, but there's 6 people in the menu, and I was like, hang on, what's going on here? But yes, you play as the Killer7, which are a band of assassins, and the gameplay, we'll get into like the story in a minute, but the gameplay function is you switch between various characters that all have slightly different abilities and properties, and you can use them in different ways to progress through the environment and make it through the story. That is the mechanical, like, bare bones description of what the video game is. Just to give some context to that. So, before we get into the story, Ashley, why did you pick this game?
Goichi Suda is a developer that I find really fascinating, even though a lot of his games are pretty, like, they're hit or miss for me, actually. Mm-hmm. But he has a lot of, obviously, his own style in his games, and all of his games are pretty different, but this was his first big hit, and I think even he still considers it to be his best game. So, it's a classic, and it's probably a game that most people who listen to a podcast like this have already played, but if not, it might introduce some new people to the game.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's definitely a game that people know about, but not everyone had a GameCube at the time, so I think with the Steam version, more people will go back and actually play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the time that I first played this game, I got the PlayStation 2 game, and that port was so bad that I just went out and bought the GameCube game. But then I still kind of bounced off of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was a function of like the weird gameplay, like the whole rail shooter kind of feel it has, or if I just couldn't appreciate the themes that it was trying to get across at the time. I don't know if I even appreciate those themes now, but it's kind of a weird experience, and I thought it would be an interesting game to talk about. So there we go.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I had a good time playing it. Before we get into like what we all thought about the game, and do you want to do like your best job at like a broad story summary?
Okay, so it is a slightly fictionalized version of the present day. Everyone took all the nukes in the world and fired them up into the atmosphere and blew them all up, and created an era of peace. But it seems like a kind of totalitarian, like, shadow global government led by the U.S. peace. And thus people seem very uneasy with everything. And there is a new set of like a new terrorist group called the Heaven Smile, which they introduced to you as like actual terrorists, but they are monsters. They're invisible monsters. So that asks some questions. It is like a virus that infects humans and turns them into invisible monsters. And the main thrust of the like geopolitics of the game is a push and pull between like aspects of the Japanese government and how they interface with America, because there's a new like militarized party in Japan that wants to break away from the United States, and then there's the version that's like buddy with the United States, and the US just is like, well, we should just maybe snuff them all out instead of dealing with any of this. And to do that, to interface with these politics, they have hired the Killer7, which is to also eradicate the Heaven Smiles. Killer7 is 8 infinite people who are one person. The way people think, the way you were presented Heaven Smiles is Harmon Smith, who is an old like Protestant preacher in a wheelchair with a giant gun, who can, it is said, can turn into 7 other people. who is like the blaxploitation character, Garshin Smith, who's like the cleaner. There's Dan Smith, who is just anime man. There's
Anime man.
There's Katie Smith, who is the lady. She is barefoot and has like a bloodstained dress. There's Kevin Smith, who is like a sunglass wearing albino stealth man.
It's still funny. It's still funny every time.
The philosophical opposite of real life Kevin Smith.
There are no jorts on this man. Can I
there's-
mod jorts into Kevin Smith's model? Killer7.
There is Coyote Smith, who is Puerto Rican and like the thief character. He can jump really high and unlock stuff. There's Con Smith, who runs really fast and shoots really fast and is just like the kid. And then there's the Luchador Masked Smith, who has grenade launchers and can move heavy objects. That's his whole deal. You pick who characters you play as, whatever, as you go through the world, and interface with the strange missions you were sent on and the increasing political unrest as Japan and the US almost go to war. Bad stuff happens to Japan in this game.
Yes.
I'm just going to segue in. I played this game probably around the time it came out. I was looking for GameCube games. I only had a GameCube. This was when I was in college. I had very little money for games, and this game went on discount very rapidly because it was not very popular. There was a time where you could get this game for $10 at a Target, no problem.
I miss video games.
Yeah. And so I played this game because I'd played every GameCube game I owned at that time. And it was the first like weird game I think I'd ever played, really. Mm-hmm. Because, there weren't indie games and I had a GameCube. Like there was stuff that was quirky, but this game embraces like a deep, weird, like aesthetic mishmash that I had never seen before, and I was very entranced with it, despite the fact I didn't like shooting games, and I genuinely still think the game is kind of unsettling to play. The Heaven Smiles freaked me out. They continue to freak me out. It was also the first like politics game that wasn't Metal Gear that I'd played, which man, we'll talk about that, I guess.
Yeah.
So I have affection for this game. I imported the soundtrack from Japan back in the day, spent way too much money on it. This is a beloved game for me, but I had not revisited it in many years, and was actually delighted to find that I still enjoy pretty much all of it. I think it's a mess, but I think it's a really interesting mess.
Because I know that you have played like other Suda games like he released after this and been increasingly more thinking emoji at them.
Well, I like No More Heroes, 1. I only played a little bit of 2. I really dislike Killer is Dead, which is the other game that is kind of like this. It's kind of the middle ground between Killer7 and No More Heroes, and I think it's a really bad game.
And then I know it's not like he didn't direct it, but like Grasshopper did that Let It Die game that was awful.
I didn't play that, and people seem to like that. I don't know. I didn't touch it.
Some of the gameplay was fine, but it really like became a game in which you were going to put some money into it real quickly. I don't know, which is very depressing.
Okay. I mean, like I've tried to play Flower, Sun, and Rain. It's just too old and clunky for me to like really interface with. I didn't spend a lot of effort with it. I know some people like the Silver Case. Like I'm not here to say all Goichi Suda games are terrible. I just nothing has replicated the high I felt playing Killer7 the first time. Nothing ever will, just because I'm a different person. But I still have affection for that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, when coming to it, was like, not disappointed is the wrong word. I mean, it wasn't as weird as I was like expected, because this game, for someone in 2005 who hasn't like been neck deep in anime culture for the last 5 years, right, must have been just something else. Whereas now it feels like kind of a more surface level, like smattering of weirdness and arch presentation on top of very familiar themes. And I don't mean that as a critique of the game. I actually really love the game. Specifically, I think the way it turns this era of like Capcom game design, Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, use keys to open doors, into just the smoothest form of itself with its pathing rail shooter mechanics. I think that's the part of the game I really adore. Whereas the part where it was weird and off kilter, at least in a grand thematic way, I think it works better on a more like moment to moment basis. But that was less effective for me. Just because I played it for the first time in 2019, and I have played all the Metal Gears, and I've watched a lot of anime, and and I have heard about, I know that the election has been rigged. These are things I am aware of. But I don't think that really takes away from the game being like, it just puts it in a different context. It's still very cool.
Well, here's my actual question. Is the election is determined by a single school in the northwest of the United States more or less ridiculous than Russia has secretly influenced the U.S. election?
Shit. I mean, as a
British person, please give me your read on this situation.
As portrayed in the game. So if you strip out the parts of the game to do with multiple personality and a luchador wrestler that carries grenade launchers and an assassin child from the past and the future and God, the premise of a school that lives in the right district being a front for for people to choose who is the next leader of America is more believable than the idea that someone went, if we're gonna change the world with posts.
I mean, I guess at its core, if you strip away all of the stylish elements, this is a story about gerrymandering and how it can be abused by people.
The actual premise of how this works has been thought through I'm not saying it's actually a believable story. I don't think it happens. I'm not doing a conspiracy theory here or saying that Killer7 is genius about the way that, I am saying that the idea that Russian trolls would a deliberate electoral rigging thing is stupid.
Oh, they are the real heaven smile.
They are. I was not prepared for it to go off in this. Just the other day, you were saying that podcasts should try to be evergreen.
Unfortunately, we will be living in the hellscape of relitigating 2016 for many years to come.
It's 2019. We're making some 2016 jokes because they have never gone away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ashton, what did you think of the game? Going back to it, because you played it again.
Yeah, so I played it, like I said, I bounced off of it the first time, which was in 2005, 2006. Mm-hmm. And then I played it a couple years ago, and I loved it. And I still enjoyed it a lot. I think I also have experienced a wider range of things that are like this since the first time that I really fell in love with it. So, a lot of its, quirky charm kind of wasn't as effective, but was kind of replaced by nostalgia, I guess. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's a weird game because there's puzzles, but they're not hard puzzles, so they're just kind of you go through them in a very direct way. The combat is there, but nothing super hard. A lot of the bosses are pretty easy. Some of the bosses are literally impossible to lose. But it all comes together into something that is, I think, worth experiencing. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a great time. I think the reduction of that game design is very cool and effective. And you look at the history of this kind of game, and you see it becoming progressively less and less complicated. The puzzles in Resident Evil 1, which I didn't play too much of because I'm a big baby, but even at the start, they are way more complex than they ever become in Killer7. I think the furthest out Killer7 goes is having you listen to tapes to put keys into the computer to find out who Emil Parkreiner is. And even that is just kind of very direct. Collect all the things and put them in there. The puzzle solving is definitely less complex, and so it ends up becoming something that is more about the process of the satisfaction of going through these motions. It reminds me a lot of another game that is in a different genre, but takes the same approach to that genre that has been around for the 90s. It's like the Tomb Raider Legend of these games, where you go through and you just satisfactorily do the tasks that are appointed of you to solve the puzzles to get into the next room. And that is a game from the exact same year that was approaching a genre that was very puzzles were used to be kind of old and finicky, and just making them very simplified but satisfying to do. And I like that as an ethos. So I think that's really cool about this game. I was less into the fact that I had to stop every 2 seconds to hear 2 minutes of a character talking about something that I didn't understand. I thought that was kind of bad.
I would disagree. I love stopping and talking to the weirdos that inhabit your mental ghost space or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the visual design of the characters is like super great to me. Just like the different shirts that Travis wears, especially, and yeah, just like the fact that like these are characters that you don't really know why they're connected to you at the start, but you know that they're connected to you, and then you like, they kind of unravel their own story as well as helping you, well, supposed to be helping you get through the game, but like most of the stuff is so simple that you probably would have figured it out if they weren't there.
Yeah, I think I talked to the businessman who helps you like figure out the clues once.
Yeah, don't ever talk to him again unless you want to use his ability, because he doesn't tell you anything of note.
Yeah, because he'll just say you have to do this thing, and then you shoot the mask, and then the mask will say the same thing but more directly.
And with a fuck you thrown in.
And then eventually you realize that the mask like already has the map already has like a label for everything you can interact with and what you need to interact with it.
Yep.
So it definitely makes it very easy to approach all of its puzzles.
Yeah. Also, you could just alt tab and go to the IGN walkthrough, which is what I did whenever I was moderately stuck on anything.
The only puzzle that was like, what the fuck am I meant to do, was the one to get the tape recorder.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
And the walkthrough I was using didn't mention it, because you can go through, because it was like, oh, it's much quicker to do this and then go back and get the tape recorder and put it in later, which kind of screwed me over. Like, I didn't get to experience the last level as it was intended because I ended up doing that because I didn't know I had to get the tape recorder. I was like, oh, I can't figure out what this puzzle is right now. I'm sure I'll back around, and eventually I just made it to the final room. I still didn't have the tape recorder or know how to open the second vault, and I had to go back and do all that with no enemies around, so it felt kind of empty. And I got all the tapes in. I'd already got all the tapes, so I just listened to them all in one go and put the clues in. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you go through the stuff, it's good.
Yeah. I feel like I don't disagree with anything you said. I think I appreciate this game more on its aesthetic level. As I was playing it, I described it as the Toonami promo for an anime you never watched, and I feel like that's still true. The moment to moment, like what is happening in the story, who is what are you doing on any given mission, is kind of incoherent. And I think that's deliberate in that it's like a pastiche of a bunch of ideas. Like there's a whole Dan chapter that wraps around the entire fact that like in the game they describe Dan as like an anime character, and he just gets the like Spike Spiegel anime protagonist plot where he has to go and deal with his mentor, who is now like an evil person, and have a standoff as they both use guns in the same way in a big like dramatic shootout that is a bad boss fight, because the boss fights in this game are bad. But then you have like the one-off episodes where you go in Cloudman, when you go to like the weird cultist and you're going around the town talking to people, and they give you literal anime cutscenes of characters talking about the cult leader and how he's affected the town and what they think of him. And it just reminds me of this like disjointedness of like, I'm going to turn on an anime I've never seen before. Is this the lore episode? Is this a one-off mission episode?
No.
I distinctly have that memory of watching anime in the early aughts when I would just like randomly have television on. And I think Killer7 really embraces that aspect of like the aesthetics of being into like anime things in a way that very few games have ever done. Like you think of something like what's that Sentai Show shooter game? You know what I'm talking about, right? The top-down roguelike that does the VHS like Voltron aesthetic.
Chroma Force?
No.
The top-down roguelike that does the VHS aesthetic.
The one Austin really likes, where you hit the pause and it's like a VHS tape.
Galaxy?
Yes, Galaxy. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
When you think of something like Galaxy that pulls from the aesthetics of anime, it's very much like an older, like more classic anime fan aesthetic. And to me, this is like just rolling up and not knowing what was going to be on the TV and seeing a cool episode of Witch Hunter Robin. And I think it does that really well. It does the exact same thing where you're like, there's politics here, but they're incoherent. Is this the anime? Do I not understand because I'm 16? Is it just because it's dubbed, because it's on the television? I don't know. I can't tell. I'll never know because I'm never going to revisit these shows.
Yep.
And going back to this and realizing that no, there's statements here, but also they are kind of deliberately incoherent because they play fast and loose with stuff. Like a lot of the missions you go on in the game do not matter for anything. The part where there's a comic book artist who just makes comic book characters that come alive and fight you means nothing. It's a one-off.
And that's like the penultimate episode of the game, which
yes.
Like while it's happening, and due to the amount of anime cutscenes in that thing, feels like it's building up to like the plot conclusion. It's not. It's just a thing you do.
The thing I like about that is that Cloudman has anime cutscenes, and that level, I don't remember the name of the level, has anime cutscenes. They're in a different style, and the Cloudman ones are like have a distinctive like personality to them, the way they look. They're really evocative. And then the ones in that level are the most bland, like, tie-in anime possible. Like that scene where Dan's just standing there watching the guy play the guitar and he's not animating and he looks bad because it's a bad drawing of Dan Smith. Very good.
I did not at first realize that was meant to be Dan. It's like, is that Dan? Is that a new character? Who is that? Who is that guy's face? What is that face? It could be anyone. It's just an anime man. I don't know how intentional that is, but it doesn't really matter in the end. It's still very good.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you mentioned that like boss fights are bad, I think it's funny because they have a bunch of boss fights that like it'd be really hard to make like a great action-y boss fight with this game, the way this game is structured. But they have like the first boss is really slow. You just like wait for it to do like the slow attack and then run around it. There's a couple bosses that you literally just like hold your cursor on them and shoot repeatedly. And then they have one boss that could have been really interesting, which is I think it's Kuchiki and Akiba or something like that.
Yeah.
And that could have been a really interesting boss fight, except they tell you to shoot the tie, which means that the rest of the boss fight falls into place. Like it could have been like a puzzle, like you try and figure out what you're supposed to do, but instead it just tells you what to do. And then yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that if they did more puzzle boss fights and they didn't give you a way to like tell you the solution to the puzzle, then it could have been a little better in terms of like the boss fights.
Mm-hmm. I think there was some of them. I really like the I don't think it was a boss fight, but there's that set piece in the big just a big circular ring. And you've got to turn around and then run the other direction, so it automatically turns around so you can get the weak spot. There's stuff like that that ended up being pretty cool. I wasn't as down on the boss fights as people here. I thought they were mostly fine. The only one I really didn't like was the one in the car park.
I mean, and then you basically play that exact same thing again in the room with the shutters.
It's much better in the room with the shutters.
Yeah, no, I agree, but also it's just standing there waiting to shoot the girl who runs around real fast. Like that's all there is to it.
Both of them have the same. Well, here's the thing: is that like both of them have the same problem with it takes way too many hits to take out the person. But then you get to like my experience with the Cloudman boss, which is I literally ran around, saw his weak spot, shot him, he was dead. It was like I barely registered as a boss fight. I was like, wait, was that it? Was that meant to be a bigger set piece?
That's one of the like better set piece boss fights to me because you're just running around this maze of like slammed together ambulances trying to figure out how to get to him.
I got him in like 10 seconds.
Well,
and like I guess it's good that he only took one hit, but also it meant I didn't get to really experience the like flow of that boss fight. But then the ones that took too long to kill were also annoying. So I don't know really how you solve the boss fight problem, but I never know how you solve the boss fight problem in a lot of games.
Yeah, no, I agree. I appreciate the ones that are more like just a scripted sequence, like the Handsome Man fight or the shootout with Curtis Blackburn. Like just this is what's going to happen. It's going to look cool. It's not an actual challenge thing. I think is a better thing to do with this game because it just the mechanics of what it is. I don't think allow for boss fights in the way you think of them to happen very well.
So what do people think of the like moment to moment just moving around and shooting mechanics? We haven't really talked about that much. Because we talked about the puzzles and level design, but the like walk into a room, hear laughter, pull up the first person, do the scan, shoot the heaven, smile.
Something that's happened with a lot of like horror in video games is that they've effectively become action games, and that's because like older horror games like Resident Evil had like the tank controls, and that meant your control wasn't as fluid, so it wasn't like as much of an action game. I think this game manages to evoke some of that, where like you enter a room and you hear a laugh, or like you're running down a hallway and you hear a laugh, and you have to like go into first person and scan, and maybe like the thing was around a corner or is behind you. You don't know necessarily where it's coming from until you manage to look the right way and scan it. So like, and it could be running at you that whole time for all you know, and that can evoke kind of that same like horror feel of like maybe it's not ideal that the horror comes from the fact that you don't have like great control of your character, but it ends up doing that in my opinion, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. I ended up feeling like it because I don't like horror games as a rule. I'm a big baby. I don't like to be scared. But I was completely fine with because I like didn't even register on the scale. But I did feel unsettled. I thought it was a very good way of like communicating the ideas of like what horror is without any of the like horror parts, if that makes sense. Like I get unsettled when I hear the laughter. I like scramble and panic to find the weak spot as I hear them coming. I have to like awkwardly mess with the controls and turn around, like press the B button to turn around, press the A button to run if I need like a little bit more space. Sometimes like changing between your personas. Like all of that stuff adds up to this really good. It is fundamentally not a survival horror game. But it does communicate a lot of the mood of the moment to moment of those kind of encounters without making it actually like capital S scary, because the aesthetic is just too cool and chill for that to ever really overpower anything.
Even the enemies are super colorful.
I think the first level is like also the most it ever leans into its horror aesthetics. Like the start of the game is a little bit more unsettling than the rest of it, but all in all, I was very fine with that, and I was like, this is a horror game for people like me, I guess.
I think that's interesting because I feel about the exact same amount of tension I do playing Killer7 as I do playing something like Resident Evil.
No. Killer7 doesn't have anything jump out at you.
Jump scares are not the problem. It's going into a room, hearing the noise that means that something around the corner is about to shuffle at me, and then having to deal with that. That is the thing that is scary. A jump scare is startling sometimes, and then eventually becomes like dumb, but that's not what horror is.
Oh yeah, but I don't know. I just feel like it was because of the way that the like tank controls work. I don't have to like do the thing where you inch around a corner and try to avoid seeing what's going to be like jump out at you. I felt pretty comfortable most of the time when like if I was going to do a scan, I felt safe. It doesn't really spawn enemies right on top of you. It doesn't really spawn enemies behind. There was a couple times it spawned enemies behind you that were like effective because of how little it does it. Mm-hmm. So there were moments that like ratcheted up the tension and that stuff, but you know, I don't know. It felt easier to me than Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 1's a much scarier game. I can't tell you why. It just was my truth.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I just don't have that experience. Like I finished every chapter of Killer7 feeling very wrung out, and played this game in like pretty short, like hour, 90-minute bursts because otherwise I was just too frazzled.
I think this explains our different feelings on the like NPC dialogue. Because I wanted this to be like a game where you just get into a sense of flow and put a key in a door, and then do the next. And I didn't want to keep being interrupted for that. Whereas
the minute Travis is going to show up and say something nonsensical and thrust at the air, I'm like, oh, finally a break.
Yeah, that makes much more sense to me, and I can see how that atmosphere would work in the game.
I'd also the first time you meet a new type of smile, that is like a very effective moment. Like the first time you meet the small ones that fly you a lot faster, because that was like the first fast enemy you saw. The first time you meet the ones that crawl on the ceiling, because before that you didn't really have anything to like look up at necessarily. Like the first time something spawns behind you, like anytime like there's a first time something happens, because you aren't you don't have the muscle memory to like approach that situation yet, it makes it really effective, I think.
the enemy that always was the most, I have to take this out because it's too much. Like I can't deal with the noise that I'm hearing is the rolling one, and they're actually the least threatening enemy in the game. If you get killed by the rolling enemies, you're bad at Killer7. But that noise of just like the little ding ding ding
Little
ding,
baby
ding,
ball?
the
Yes.
little baby ball. I'm like, stop it! Who is doing that? I need to kill them before I like even move even further. And they are easily not close to the most threatening enemies in the game, but they're the ones I hated seeing the most because of that noise.
Okay. That's interesting.
Just how I was.
Yeah, no, I understand. That's like me with every enemy.
Yep. I want to talk a little bit about the story towards the end of the game.
Sure. What part?
Yeah. So, do we want to summarize it? We haven't really been super summarizing things. We've been kind of just...
Okay, I'll do it as quickly as possible because the game spends a lot of time like suggesting and walking around ideas, right?
Yeah, and we're not going to talk about the like stuff in Hand of Killer7, which is as the game presents it.
Yes. So the U.S. Is upset about the relations and basically fires a bunch of missiles at Japan, supposedly destroying it. That's how it's played or whatever. Like most of Japan is gone. However, a lot of the like militant party of Japan rallied around a leader in the United States, and there's millions of them living in the U.S., which is a problem because they've discovered that they can go to the school that because the demographics are set up, the people who live in the area where they vote at this school are always the people who end up deciding the way the election goes. And they're like, they're going to have 10 million Japanese people go and vote in this election and choose the president. And then where will the US be? And this also happens to be the school that trains assassins in like the 50s.
Same school.
Yes. And so this was like a front to help train super assassins and also determines who the president is. And in the school, they trained a young boy named Emil Parkreiner, who is a mystery. But you'd been getting like carrier pigeon letters throughout the game of someone writing to Emir to give them information about the Killer7. And you're like, oh, someone's talking about us. And you eventually learn that they were not talking about you. They were talking about the original Killer7, which were assassins that lived 50 years ago. There were just 7 people. And at some point, Emil Parkreiner killed them all in the hotel that you visit twice or whatever. And then, like, had a mental break and shot himself.
Yep.
And in doing so, him and all the people he killed were absorbed into Harmon Smith, who is the only real person, but also might be like a mystical being that transcends time. They imply that he is like a god that exists in like a yin-yang state with like a Asian god. Like Garson Smith is like the Western religion, and his villain is Kunlun, who is like Eastern religion, and they are constantly fighting a battle for the souls of all mankind or whatever. But also there's like an Earth avatar that is an old man who can manifest all the dead, and did that with Garcian and the rest of Killer7, or with Emir, who is now Garcian, and the rest of Killer7, who all seem to keep their names. I don't know. But and they are all exist as his agents on Earth in this weird time. And then you can decide whether or not the U.S. blows up the last bastion of Japan or not.
So from that, there's a lot of stuff there. There's like multiple levels. The most interesting and the best level to me was the lowest one, which is all the Emir Garcian stuff and that twist. The way it's executed is frankly like stunning in how underplayed it is for this game that is so wacky. What happens is you go through the hotel one time and you find a bunch of magic bullets, and that's just normal. You just find the bullets in this place. You find the bullets
in every level. You have to find the bullets to unlock the boss door.
Yeah, and you find the bullets, you unlock the boss door, everything is normal and fine. You're like, oh, I'm out of the hotel, never coming back there again. Then you eventually go back to the hotel, and there's no enemies.
Yeah, the thing that I think is worth noting is that in the rest of the game, the bullets are almost always behind puzzles, or like big enemy rooms. And in the hotel, there are enemies, but every time you go to get a bullet, they're just in an empty hotel room where there's nothing there.
Occasionally there's like a ghost there.
Yeah,
that you have a little unrelated conversation to, but you just go find the bullets. Like there's one with like a toaster in a bathtub, and you're like, man, something happened here. And because the game kind of trains you to like bounce off everything, you're like, well, I guess I won't think any further about that. And then you come back and you find out that all the magic bullets that you recovered in the first game, the first time through this level, were the times that Emil Parkreiner killed the original Killer7. As you learn that Garcian is Emir, and the big final reveal is he opens the case that he's been using to revive everyone.
Yes, because if a character dies, their head is left in a bloody bag, and then you have to take Garcian and collect it, and then they'll be resurrected.
Yep. And inside his case, which has been implied that he's been like putting his body in medical equipment, is just everyone's weapons. And it's the moment you never expected, because the game has packed so much bullshit on top of everything, that when it all comes down to it, it's just a "you were the killer all along" story. You just whenever, because you would have, if I had told you the setup to this game, like without you knowing it was just this weird thing, just about a bunch of assassins that are all changing personalities. First guess is, oh, they're all one guy. And that ends up being true.
But the game makes
true.
it explicit from the jump that they're all one guy. They just tell you it's the wrong guy.
Yes. And yeah, the way all that like ends up folding back into the other layers is less interesting. It's more this one moment of, oh, right, it's bad to be raised by the state assassin, I guess. Classical anime themes, but it still works. It's a good ending.
For me, it was specifically, this is the first game I'd ever encountered the idea that Japan might have thoughts about how the U.S. treated them as like a country and a military after World War II. And so that stuff I remember being very evocative when I played this the first time, because it was just stuff I had never even thought about before. And so on that level, when it's the first time you're ever encountering these things, the ending where you get to decide whether or not the U.S. blows up Japan or Japan infiltrates the U.S. and takes it over was really incredible and evocative. And as someone who has seen a bunch of media now, doesn't really play in the same way. I'm like, oh, it's one of these. Okay.
Yeah, it basically didn't impact me at all.
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
we've all
sure.
seen Shin Godzilla.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or any other, like, 1,000 things. But, like, in this instance, I remember it being, I was like, I can't believe this is, like, the final choice. This is incredible.
Especially because, like, not really a thing that people are taught in American schools.
Yeah, absolutely not. We've never talked about this.
So if you haven't, like, read super widely as a teen, then you're going to get... Your first experience with this is going to be from some anime bullshit or a game.
Yeah.
Like, every time.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yep. Both times I've played this game, I sided with Japan. I don't know what that says about me.
And we don't like America very much.
Well, that's true.
Do you have any more thoughts on the ending stuff? What other bits do we want to hit in this discussion?
So if you are interested in Killer7, you play it and you're like, okay, there's a lot here, it's kind of a mess. I would invite you to go look at the like lore book that was released after Killer7 came out, which is called Hand in Killer7, right?
Yes. There is a file on GameFAQs that is the whole thing. Yes.
And it will explode out the lore of the game in directions that are both interesting and terrible, as such things are wont to do. There's a lot of stuff there, and a lot of it is like things that are just not in the game that are expanded out upon conjecture-wise. I remember poring over it back in the day. I didn't even look at it this time. I was going to, and then I started, and I was like, you know what? I don't actually want to talk about any of this. I don't want to be this person. I just want to enjoy the game for what it is.
Yeah, I was also like considering it, but then was like, I would actively rather not do this so I can think about the game on its own merits.
Yep. Because this didn't exist when I played the game originally, but there's a YouTube videos of someone breaking down the book page by page and talking about what's on there, because then you get to see all the cool art, because it's also a very cool art book of all the characters and stuff.
Mm-hmm. The GameFAQs page is in ASCII, as they all are.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting because it builds up all this lore and none of it matters. Like, Harmon Smith versus Kunlun, like, it opens the game and then ends the game with like 100 years later in Shanghai. This is happening again, where the beginning of the game is the end of the game, but in a radically different context. And you're like, yeah, I get it. The war never ends.
War is hell, and it continues because it's just it's just the gods of war fighting forever.
And all that stuff is like kind of surface level and shallow, and I've seen it a dozen times, but I still really like the like panache with which this game goes and pulls all of that off. It should not cohere as well as it does, but because everything is in abstraction layers and one of the most stylish games still that I've ever played, it's great. I just, the moment to moment, I'm like, I'm enjoying this. It's not, maybe not particularly deep, but it rarely looks as good being presented to me.
Yeah, like, the fact that it's not deep is fine because it actually, like, all these ideas are present in the game and they're intentional, but it never talks about them in the way that, other games that people are like, this is a, cool Japanese game that's about things, like, talk about that. No one's monologuing about this stuff. There'll, like, be some, like, references in someone's dialogue, but mostly you'll walk into a room and start playing Russian roulette with a guy who's like, I'm going to teach you the secret to hitting on every woman. And you're like, what? Okay, sure. And then Garcian is super cool as he doesn't even hesitate every time he plays Russian roulette, just pulls the trigger and it clicks every time. And so it leans into the, like, moment to moment being just scenes that are cool. So it ends up being fine that the game isn't deep with what it's saying because it ends up not saying it that much. It's more just look at the stuff. Look at how cool this is. My favorite screen in the game comes really early on, which is one of my favorite screens in any video game. I know M knows what it is. It's down by the laundry room in the first area. There is a staircase going up, and the staircase has 2 levels, and in the middle level there is a save room. And as you go up the staircase, the first bit is just a staircase rendered in Killer7 style, but at the last bit they don't even render the staircase. It's just a flat grey texture. You see your character ascend, and then it fades to the, like, room select overlay as you get up to the top. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really good.
The things this game does with, like, spaces, excellent, fantastic. I feel like we've been talking a lot. Ashley, do you have any takes you want to add?
I think it's great that you can't beat the first level until you flush a toilet.
It's true. You do have to flush the toilet. Just turn on the aircon as well.
You don't have to turn on the air conditioner. That's only that clears the flames if you light the candles in the wrong order.
Oh, right, yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you had to turn... I'm trying to work out what I did wrong. I guess I did turn on the candles in the wrong order the first time.
I did too, because for some reason I just didn't look and see the numbers underneath the candles.
Oh yeah,
I had ran into the candles before I got the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers aren't there. I think even if you get the clue, those numbers aren't there on Deadly, and then I found out they were there on Normal, and it's kind of funny that, like, the games care so little about you actually solving its puzzles as opposed to going through the motions that it can literally just put those numbers there.
Yep.
So the thing with Deadly that is the main difference, because if you played it on Deadly then, so do the enemies not have weak spots, or do they just not reveal the weak spots?
The enemies...
'Cause I know they don't have the glowing, like, things, but if there's still a spot you can kill an enemy in one hit.
I definitely had enemies that blew up into blood, so I think you just are supposed to, like, try where you know the weak spots can be. And
okay. Because that would make the game so much more hectic and take forever. Because I definitely got into a rhythm once I had, like, figured out how the game worked, that I could just walk into a room, scan, immediately kill someone, hit that weak spot, get the blood. Every level I got more blood than was needed for all the upgrades. Like, I would always end with 1,000 blood that would never go anywhere because of how the upgrades are limited per level.
Yeah, I mean, they limit the amount of blood that you can use for upgrades because there's a few points in the game where you can literally farm enemies infinitely. But, like, in the levels where you just are killing enemies normally and you hit that limit, it feels really bad. To me, at least.
Oh yeah, it feels really bad to me as well. I think it was a bad choice in how they limit upgrade progression. I think there are so many better ways to do that, because it ends up disincentivizing you from playing with characters you haven't already leveled up.
I'm trying to remember. I think weak spots are visible on Deadly. I think it's only in Killer 8 that they're invisible. I've played it on both
only
modes.
In Killer 8?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay, I thought that... I swore it said that there's no weak spots in Deadly on the title sequence, but that could have been Killer 8 and I'm getting confused.
Yeah, I don't want to sound really silly in the final podcast if I said that there were no weak spots in there.
Well, there is at least one mode where there are no weak spots. I was just curious how that worked.
Yeah, in Killer 8, in addition to getting young Harmon Smith and getting one shot by basically every enemy, the critical spots are invisible and there's no map legend. I think Deadly, the only difference is that you get fewer hints for the puzzles and stuff. And the enemies take a few more shots, but it's not nearly as drastic as Killer 8.
I don't understand why you would like that. That is uninteresting difficulty wise. I don't know why you'd want to be one shot by everyone.
I mean, Dante Must Die. People like that style of game, right?
Yeah,
people like that style of game, but like I don't know. It's the same thing as European Extreme Metal Gear. Like, it is integral to Killer7 to have a thing explode on you and then be like, ah shit, all my health, I gotta run.
I mean, you can't play Killer 8 until you've beaten the game, so it's just there for people who want to play more of the game, right?
I've beaten all of these games mentioned on the difficulties mentioned, so I guess it's just a personal preference.
Oh no, for sure. I just would want the toughest difficulty balanced across like all the things that make the game good. But you know,
some people want to play hard games.
Yeah, that's fine. Fine.
I played it on normal. Every time I've ever played this game, it's been on normal.
Yep. I will. If I ever go back, I will also play it on normal. I don't see myself increasing it.
I'm already stressed enough just by playing Killer7. So.
The main difference is that while I personally like difficult games, I totally understand why other people would want to play it on easier difficulties. And I hate when there's people who like have like the, oh, you never beat Bayonetta on Infinite Climax. Are you even like a real gamer? Like that's the worst.
Well, yeah, those people are bad. They'd be Bayonetta elitists. Bayonetta would kick your ass.
Bayonetta literally has a mode to allow you to play the game with like one button. Just play the game.
Bayonetta wants everyone to enjoy Bayonetta.
Is that everything we have? Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Not really. I just think we should mention one of the moments. We never shouted out the time the building falls over.
Oh, right.
Which is one of the coolest things to ever happen in a video game. Yeah, I just wanted to get that on tape.
You go through Cloudman. I'm just going to explain. You go through Cloudman, and everyone's talking about this guy who showed up and created this giant, like, corporate, like, self-help cult thing that has recently taken a bent into terrorism. And so you're like, oh, this is like a company town now, and it's all corrupt, and I'm going to go in, I'm going to storm the giant skyscraper, and I'm going to fight this guy and tear down his whole empire. And you go through the main door of the giant skyscraper, and on the other side, it's just like a old-timey Hollywood facade, like in a cartoon. It's like a 300-foot tall piece of cardboard held up by struts that falls over as soon as you go through the door. And the guy is just in a trailer slightly down the way.
Yeah, it's literally the Monty Python the Holy Grail joke. And it's fucking good.
It's very good.
It's so funny. Because it's not like, I mean, this will be obvious if you've played the game or seen the game, but if you haven't, it's not like the building is a cardboard cutout in the... like. When you walked up to it before, it was a thing that looked like a building, and then you go into the next room, and then it falls over. It's not like it was always a cardboard cutout in the just in the level, in the model of it you see originally.
Yeah.
The way it pulls the rug out from under you is very good. It's also very 15-year-old genius. It would have blown my mind. Cause if everyone thinks you're super powerful, then it's the same thing. You don't need to do any of the things. And every teenager goes, "Man, this is genius."
It's pretty good. I still like
it. So. No, that wasn't an insult. That is like, I appreciate Killer7's, dumb guy genius. Someone needs to be doing it.
Yeah.
On some level, I'd rather have it than Kojima actually trying to say something with the man with the skull for a face.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So, Ashley, any final thoughts?
I'm just trying to work out in my brain whether I think Goichi Suda or Hideo Kojima is the better wacky Japanese auteur, as much as I hate that concept.
I mean, it's a bad concept. It ends up harming anyone who gets that title. You just look at the weird cultish like tweets around
Swery?
I've completely forgotten his name. But the Nia guy. Why have I forgotten his name?
Yoko Taro.
Yoko Taro, yeah. I do know his name. I've been bad with names recently. If you listen to multiple podcasts, and this has happened in every one. But yeah, the way people get lifted to this kind of can do no wrong level is just a bit embarrassing, especially when this game has a lot of stuff in it that is bad, and I don't mean Cloudman is a black hypersexual cult leader voiced by Cam Clark.
Yeah.
Teaching everyone the way of American, the way American men are meant to be. There's a lot going on there that I don't even think the people making the game have really considered how bad this is. But luckily it came out before Ideology, so we just kind of could ignore that at the time. But even going back to it, it's it's there. You don't ignore it. It is a thing that is real. Calling Suda do no wrong genius it seems short-sighted, but also saying that there's nothing. Writing him off because of some bad things also is bad. I don't know. He's a guy that makes games. There's a lot of guys that make games.
I mean, I think Suda has leaned into weird, Japanese and anime auteurism more than Kojima has. I don't think Kojima thinks his games are especially weird most of the time. I think he's just trying to tell a story. It's got some extreme elements because it's about things. I think Goichi Suda probably makes games that he thinks are cool aesthetically, and that just leads to things that can be kind of weird. Shadows of the Damned is someone who knows what their brand is making a video game.
Yes. I mean, Kojima is in many ways raging against his brand. He's trying to become a legitimate filmmaker at all times. Mm-hmm. He put Kiefer Sutherland in the game. He wants to be the serious filmmaker hanging out with Guillermo del Toro.
I mostly meant that as a joke. The couple people that I usually hear held up to that title are Swery, Yoko Taro, Goichi, and Hideo Kojima. And I don't necessarily know that all of them actually live up to that concept or that they would want to, but once Jackson mentioned Kojima, that's where my brain went, was
Little do they know, the only good developer is Keita Takahashi, so
I think that's going to be it. Unless anyone has any last thing to say, we're going to move on to emails. If you want to send us an email, you can send them to podcast@abnormalmapping.com. We have 3 emails about Killer7. I will read them all out. First one is from Shumik. Suda, like several other well-known Japanese game developers, often includes mechanics or sections in his game that are obtuse, frustrating, tedious, or unsatisfying in some way for the player. Sometimes these sections or mechanics seem like deliberate attempts to elicit those feelings from the audience. Do you feel like these elements add to these games as a matter of theme or texture in some other way, or do they detract from the overall experience? I think we're all pretty positive on the stuff that's in Killer7, right?
Yeah, I can think of sections in his other games that would fit this description, but I just don't personally know that I can think of any from this game necessarily. Which feels like a cop-out because then I don't know how to answer the question. But
I mean, there's a lot of talk around this game that positions it as tedious and awkward. I actually found it very smooth and easy to play.
Yes,
I think.
At the time, there was a lot of critical confusion over the idea. Why would you even want a game to be on rails? That's not what video games are. You want the player to be able to move through the space.
And I get that, but I think I don't think this game is trying to be awkward to play in the way that No More Heroes is trying to do a pastiche of video games. You do collect a bunch of things to make the stuff happen in No More Heroes in a way that is so thuddingly deliberate.
Yep.
This game, you use the keys to open doors, and you do it fairly quickly.
Our next question is from Declan. Hope today's treating you good. It is. Very excited when I saw you attacking Killer7, a game I love very much and would never ever defend even if you paid me. I think you could actually just defend Killer7 to people. I think it's fine. I don't think there's too much that's bad in this game, and I think most of the other stuff makes up for what is there. you add some caveats for content and you're good. That said, if you could take any aspect of the game's presentation that jumped out to you and integrate it into another game that you felt was a little lacking in the way Killer7 wasn't, what would your first pick be and why?
Ooh, this is a difficult one.
Kind of
I mean, I just more games to look like this, I guess. That's a cop-out answer, but it looks really good. But I don't know what the other disparate elements you could even pull from the game would be in this sense.
I think it would be nice if more of the cinematic games had this press A to go forward, press B to go back aspect to them. Jackson has sat on enough Skype calls with me when I played through Uncharted 3 and just couldn't figure out what I was supposed to climb on because there's 7,000 things in the environment and none of them are highlighted properly because they're going for realism, that I really just wish I could hit the A button and be taken to the next thing I have to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, the game basically being its own design spreadsheet, if you need to interact with a thing, it will put it on the screen. There are no other options but the options that you have. So there's no situation where you walk around the same area over and over again. Is this a platform I can jump on? Is this a thing I can interact with? No. It solves that problem. And yes, so you're right. They should put this traversal mechanic in video games that aren't. And even if you think you found a dead end, it will give you a guitar sting version of a mystery noise. Yeah, no, if there's a thing that looks like a dead end, you will know if it's actually a dead end or if it's a weird interactable undiscerned area.
Oh, I just realized this is the perfect way to combine the elegance of 2D adventure games and the better the better feeling of spatial interaction with 3D adventure games, where a space in a 3D adventure game feels a lot more alive and a lot more interesting, but it's really bad when you have to try and find the one pixel in on the screen. And that if you just the way that you move around in the space and interact with objects in Killer7, if you just had that in a 3D adventure game, I think that would be really interesting.
Yep.
I mean, the rare occasions in Rest in Peace Telltale's games where you had to actually directly control a character were always really awkward, and this would slot in perfectly to those.
Yes.
I'm thinking about remember the time you had to walk up and down the train in the first Walking Dead for no reason over and over again?
Yep.
To put all the things in? This would go very well with those games. Shame no one will make any of them again.
There have to be a few Telltale ex-employees that are trying to
I mean, they're trying to get paid and eat.
Yeah.
The industrial scale of organization to make this happen. There'll be some Telltale style games, but that genre died overnight in a way that is profound. Because they were the company that did them. I'd love to see that style return and make a resurgence somewhere else, but I am doubtful.
And then we have one last email from Tron that includes a bunch of questions that I think we've answered through the podcast. So there's one that we did not, which is they watched some gameplay footage of this game because they had not played it and had a bunch of questions about it. And one of them was, does this feel like a road not taken for the shooter genre? We've mostly talked about this game as a adventure game, but it is also as much a shooter as it is a puzzle solving game. How does everyone feel about this as a road that shooters could take?
I'm actually really curious. How did the shooting feel? Did either of you play with keyboard and mouse?
No, I had a controller.
Okay, because the shooting in this game was definitely made for a controller, and it has a certain element of imprecision plus aim assist that I think is awkward but necessary for a shooter on consoles. But I think that if you had this control scheme this Rails element, but in a game where you actually got to aim with your mouse, it might be a lot more better as a shooter as opposed to just a game that has shooting in it, because that's how you interact with certain parts of the world.
I mean, the one idea that Dead Space had, right, was in a kind of Killer7's idea. You don't shoot the head every time. You shoot the things in the different weak spots to make the game happen.
Also, Binary Domain had that.
Binary Domain had that as well. Binary Domain was a little. It was a more traditional shooter, so it wasn't the same.
Oh sure.
The thing I associate with both of these games is that they are you do one shot. I mean, there is the assault rifle options in Dead Space, and it's more actiony, but I see these games as being about lining up the shots and taking them in a way that's very cool, because that's how I like to play shooters. Like, I prefer to have a shotgun or a pistol when I'm using it when I'm playing a shooter than I would a regular assault rifle. Whereas I feel like they're never designed for that. This game is very much designed for like take your shots, and because also designed around a controller, it's not like mouse and keyboard precision. So I like it a lot. I don't necessarily think it like represents a full road not taken. I think this was a more common way of designing shooters in this era. Like Resident Evil 4 is not that far off from this. Dead Rising brings in a lot of these ideas. Metal Gear Solid 3 is kind of the same game in a lot of ways. Just instead of being on rails, it's it's a stealth game. Then you go into first person, you line up the shots, you shoot the radio or the head, and you move on. So I really like this design of shooter, and I would have loved to see it more. I just think it died out for sad reasons.
I mean, the thing I would say is I think this has more in common with like light gun shooters than it does like shooters as we think of them. Those games, you're on rails and being moved through the space, and then enemies pop up like up around crates and doors and go blah, and then you shoot them. And in this, you stay when the shooting happens, you stand still, and then the enemies around the corners or come at you, like drop down from the sky. But the main mechanic is still like there is a limited time to shoot things that are going to hit your body and cause you damage, and you are just kind of parsing the screen for targets in that moment. And we did have like a light gun renaissance back when the Wii existed and Move controllers or whatever, but all that stuff's been kind of shunted off to VR, and I think that's a shame because none of us are ever going to play those things.
Nope.
But I think it's a good idea. I still think light gun games are interesting. I would like people to take modern stabs at those that don't require you to have exotic hardware that costs a bunch of money. And I mean that in like the Move controller as much as I mean the VR headset.
Yeah.
I actually found the Metal Gear Solid comparison interesting because even though I've played the hell out of those games, I never made that connection, because the one thing that I think about this game that separates it from other games is that there's the mode where you're shooting and the mode where you're not. They're very discrete, but like other than the fact that you can shoot from the hip in Metal Gear Solid, it's not very good. That also kind of basically has the same mode where you're in your third person, you're doing your stealth, and then if you have to shoot someone, you go into your shooting mode, your first person.
Yeah. And that's why I brought up Dead Rising and Resident Evil 4 as well. Like I like games where you plant your feet to shoot. I think it is a good mechanic.
And both those games have light gun installments, I think is interesting to note.
Yes. They both came to the Wii and they just did that.
Yeah.
Because it actually lines up for that really well. I always forget about Resident Evil 4 Wii, but that was a lot of people's way they played that game.
I have played it. I've originally played on GameCube, but then I did play through it again on Wii, and it's a pretty good way to play that game. But I also meant that there are Resident Evil light gun games. They're just straight up light gun Resident Evil.
Oh, that too. Yes, there is. Let's go play the Umbrella Chronicles.
I will not, but someone does.
Someone does. But yes.
And that's it for questions.
I think that's it. Yeah. Cool.
Next month we are playing Chrono Trigger. You know what that is. You can get it on... It's on, like mobile, right?
It's on mobile. It's on Steam.
You can get the DS version. It's a little too expensive. It's on PSN. You don't really want to play that version, but it's there if you're desperate. Is it on the PlayStation Classic or the SNES Classic or anything? Do you know?
I don't think it's on the SNES Classic because I think they got
Final Fantasy VI.
Final Fantasy VI instead. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So I don't think it's on those games. It's on the internet.
Yeah, it's on the internet, of course. Less than it was like a year ago because of the way that's gone.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess I have not looked for ROMs since Nintendo took down all the ROMs. But, if you can find a way to play Chrono Trigger, join us with Chrono Trigger. If you don't want to play Chrono Trigger, we will talk about it and we will explain the plot. They go through time.
Yep. And this is what happens. Ashling, would you like to provide any plugs?
Well, you can find me on Twitter, which is love, spelled L-U-V, Jane Doe. And if I ever have any other relevant plugs, I will probably have them on my Twitter, so you can just find them there eventually.
Cool.
All right. Thank you once again for being on and supporting us. Jackson, do you want to tell people where they can find all of our stuff?
All of our stuff can be found on the website at normalmapping.com. We have a bunch of podcasts there. including Second Officer Slog, which is our Star Trek podcast, usually about books. But right now, while Discovery's airing, we're doing weekly Discovery episodes instead. Maybe there'll be a book before Discovery's end. No promises.
No, there absolutely will not be. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, we're very busy. But, if you like Star Trek, go listen to the podcast. If you don't like Star Trek and want other sci-fi, well, then me and Molly do the Amory Score at ineedmayo.com. That's its own thing. But we also have...
if you go to patreon.com/abnormalmapping, you can find an array of tiers to help support the network. Find podcasts like this produced by people who pledge the Patreon. Thank you, everyone. And also for $1 a month, you get The Great Gundam Project, which is once a week on Wednesdays. Me and Jackson watch 2 episodes of Mobile Suit Gundam. As you're hearing this, we are in the end stages of War in the Pocket, which is only 6 episodes. So it was, week 2 just came out. Week 3 is coming up. We should have a very special guest for that episode. So please look forward to that. Gundam's great. We've been watching it for so long, and we have so far to go. We're not even in the 90s yet.
We're not even in the 90s yet. We were in the 90s.
Briefly, but it doesn't count.
Briefly, but not now. We are in the 90s in a week.
Did you say your Twitter handle, Jackson?
I'm at Headfuls Off.
And if you want to find me, I'm at EM_being. Until next month, play some video games.
Or don't.
Yeah, or don't, I guess.